Hey everyone, it's Jeannie, and today I'm sharing this card featuring Inkblot Shop's Crafty Hearts and the Drips and Splats stencil along with the alignment guide, and I'm sharing two sentiment sets because I couldn't decide which one I wanted to use until later. So I'm starting off using the alignment guide to center my heart right in the middle, and the alignment guide is basically an A2 grid that is sketched on the stencil material, and it helps you line up your sentiments, helps line up your images, and it's super helpful in your crafty stash. So I've been pulling it out more and more because I cannot eyeball things perfectly, and it totally helps. So I also stamped the same heart image on a full adhesive post-it, so I'm using it as a mask, and I will be covering up the mask of the heart because I will be ink blending all around it. So for the ink blending, I am using one of the stencils that is found in the Drips and Splats stencil, and I'm using the little splatter pieces. And because these have multiple images on it, I wanted to mask it off, and also it's really close to the edge, so I didn't trust myself to not ink around the area, so definitely use a mask to mask off the area to not get ink blending everywhere. If you're curious, I'm using, I think this is the scrapbook.com mint tape, and it's super low tack. I use it a lot. So I'm going to be inking up a ton of these splatters all over the card panel. I actually didn't know what I wanted to do when I went in with this idea, but I just went with it, and I'm so happy I did because it turned out. I kind of like started second guessing myself when it was a lot of splatters and it kind of looked plain, but it was so colorful. I didn't know what else to do with it. I was happy with how this turned out. So as I'm ink blending, I am picking colors that really blend well together. So I wouldn't pick colors that kind of make brown or becomes kind of muddy. So like I wouldn't be using red and green because those colors just don't blend together well. I'm only picking colors that do. So once I finish ink blending that, I move on. And I mean, at this point, I'm still kind of really hesitant about the card. I'm not really sure that this is going to turn out well. And I started Copic coloring the splatters. The first splatter is in blue, and I was like, okay, cool. But then I also realized that I wanted the splatters to have multiple colors as well. Even though the blue is colored in first, I went in over part of it in purple, and it worked well because Copic colors can go on top of each other and kind of pushes the color out. That purple shows up even though it is a little bit more blue than purple. It still worked out, and so I just remember that for the rest of the colors, and I will be coloring the rest similar. Sometimes I forget too, so I went ahead and colored in two colors for all the Copic colors, and of course again picking colors that blend well together. This was pretty easy to do. I didn't want to do any masking here. I could have inked up the entire heart, created masks for the splatters, but the splatter, there's so many small pieces that I just didn't think it was worth it. So I'd rather just go in with a Copic marker to do so. And in hindsight, I probably could have kind of created a mask around the heart, ink blended the whole thing, and then colored up the rest of it in black because I wanted the heart to be black. But I didn't really think about it like that. So I just went in and colored the whole thing. It wasn't that big of a deal. For black, if you ever color with black, you know that you shouldn't use just straight up black because it'll be flat unless that's the look you're going for. But here I wanted the heart to look dimensional, so I went in with my dark gray colors. So for Copics, I use C9, C7, and C5, and those work really well. So I went in with C9 and C7 to create that outline around the heart, and then I'll go in with my C5 and color it up. And you'll see that I was really like kind of careful with the darker colors because I didn't want it to overtake the entire heart at first. And once I colored in with the C5, you could see that the heart was pretty light. It did look more gray than black. So I'm going to go in with a second layer and just kind of expand on the darker areas around the heart. And this way, it definitely creates a darker look all over, and I was happy with how it turned out. So it's easier to go in with a lighter hand and then work your way to a darker color versus the other way. So once you put a dark color down, it's really hard to take that back. And then once I finished coloring this to a point where I was happy, I decided to add shadows on all the splatters, so it kind of looked like it was dimensional and kind of popping up on the hearts. So the effect is very light, but in person you can see it, and I think that it really adds to the card. Because I added the shadows on the splatters, I decided to do it to the heart, and then I decided to do it with all my ink blending. So that's something you definitely didn't need to do, but at this point I was still kind of hesitant about the background because it just looked very colorful, but I didn't know what else to bring to it. It looked plain to me still. By adding the shadows, I kind of thought that it just created a little bit more dimension and depth, and I liked that. And so I went in with like, I think C5 and then C1 just to blend it out a little bit more. And I was okay with it at this point. It was still kind of looking plain. I was kind of debating what I wanted to do with it. And once I added the shadows, I was like, okay, this might work, but yeah. So sometimes when I get stuck, I kind of walk away from it, and then I'll come back and see if there's anything else that I can do to kind of elevate it in a way. And sometimes I think that I add too much onto a card and it becomes really busy, but then I also have a tendency to not love my simple cards. So it's really a hard fine line, and I think that definitely everyone's just a lot harder on themselves versus others. Like, I see cards all the time, they're super simple, and I'm like, man, that's really pretty, but like it doesn't work for me. Like, I always want to add more, and so sometimes I kind of have to like take it back. At this point I was like, okay, I'm gonna add black splatter because I think it'll be cool. It'll tie into the black heart, it'll give the card just a little bit more interest. And so I'm using the Ink on 3 Atelier ink in pitch black, and I just smushed it onto my glass mat, added water, picked it up with a paintbrush, and I'm splattering it all over. And this actually makes me a lot happier because it kind of fills up that white space that's everywhere, and it doesn't seem as plain. I removed my mask because I put that mask on and I didn't want the splatter to go onto my hearts, and I'm so much happier with this. But I still couldn't walk away from it because I thought it still looked a little too flat. And even though I have the shadows to give it dimension, even though I colored the heart in a way that looks like it was dimensional, it just didn't have that look. And so I went in with a white gel pen, and the Crafty Hearts already have like the little line around the edge of the heart for the highlights, and so I basically used the white pen to go over the same lines and added the same kind of dotting. And I just referred to my stamp set because honestly, when I colored it black, like, you can't see those lines anymore. So I referred to the stamp set and put the lines there. I did the same with the splatters, and I was a lot happier with it. So for the sentiment, I decided to use the solid sayings, which is a little bit smaller than the giant solid sentiments. And I thought this worked well because I didn't want to take over the heart. I didn't want to cover it up since I worked so hard coloring it. And I decided to heat emboss that in silver because I'm going to pop this up on holographic paper. So holographic paper works really well with rainbow cards, I find, because it kind of reflects the color of the card itself, which doesn't really make sense but kind of does. You can see like the rainbow colors on the edges. It's just really cool. So I trimmed down my sentiment and I'm adding it right at the bottom of the heart. I had trimmed down my panel itself by 1/4 of an inch on the top and then the right hand side, and this is my card, and I am so happy with how it turned out, even though it was a journey to get there. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.